It's that time for me to welcome everyone to Sutta and the City. So whatever city you're in, we're all here together. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. We're really looking forward to starting this new chapter of reading. Studying the Terries was fantastic. So I want to thank all of you who joined us for that segment of our study, but this is going to be something altogether different. We're going to be studying the Buddha and his conversations with King Pasenadi and all of the intrigue that entails, and the battles, the wars won, the wars lost, the wars fought. And
We are calling it the Indian Game of Thrones.
that is what we are calling it.
We need theme music for the Kosala
Da da da
Samyutta.
da 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 bum. Okay.
Okay.
That's not so good.
Murder and Mayhem in the Nikayas.
It is. Oh my gosh, Stephen, that's what we should have named this segment.
I know.
Okay, let me write that down. Murder and mayhem in the Nikayas, because that's what
Sounds
we
like a
have.
good doctoral thesis.
It actually does.
But first,
But first,
before anything else, we have a special poem.
yes, we do have a special poem that Stephen is mighty fond of.
Unlike other people I've been told who are not
Well,
quite as fond,
less fond, we'll say. And I'm,
less fond,
well,
less enthused, although we should have really had a poem by Louise Gluck, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature today, a great Long Island poet in Long Island, New York.
we'll have,
But we'll have that next time, maybe.
and so this time we're going to have,
A man's poem.
right, who did not win the prize, but is nonetheless a great poet.
He
So why
won
don't
pretty
you,
much any other prize, but he never won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
well, the
Mr.
Nobel
Merwin.
Prize. Yeah, the Nobel Prize is pretty big.
I've heard it's important.
So why don't you hit it, Stephen?
Okay, well, a poem called "The New Song" by W.S. Merwin, who I mentioned last time had a very powerful interest in Zen Buddhism, and in fact, he moved to Hawaii permanently to study Zen Buddhism. And this poem takes on the subject of time, which is something Regina and I were talking briefly about, is not explicitly really discussed in the Nikayas, time as time. But maybe that's a good thing because it's a pretty abstruse, abstract, and intangible subject. And maybe the best way to talk about something like time is to talk about it within the context of poetry. For some time, I thought there was time, and that there would always be time for what I had a mind to do, and what I could imagine, going back to and finding it as I had found it the first time. But by this time, I do not know what I thought when I thought back then. There is no time, yet it grows less. There is the sound of rain at night arriving unknown in the leaves once, without before or after. Then I hear the thrush waking at daybreak, singing the new song.
Well, it definitely sets a mood, sets a tone.
Damned with faint praise, Regina. I don't
Oh
know.
no. Oh no, I didn't mean it quite. I found it a bit sad, but perhaps other people find it hopeful and happy, and that's great. I That would be wonderful.
Okay, well, I guess we can just move on to our Indian Game of Thrones.
Let's do it with or without our music. Oh, that's our reading. Hold on, let me find what it is I'm looking for. Are you able to see my screen?
I see a big kind of swoosh of text, semi-closed.
Okay. Do you not see? You don't see my
No,
map then.
I do not.
Well, then I'm going to make sure that you can see the map. So, as you know, gang, we're going to be, so everything that we're going to be reading in this unit is about the Buddha giving advice, giving counsel, um, aiding lay people. Uh, Specifically, we're going to see conversations between the Buddha and King Pasenadi. Now, King Pasenadi, he was king of this area right here, Kosala. And you can see that it's right near to Sakya, which is where the Buddha was born and where he's from, which is again why he's referred to as Shakyamuni. He's from Sakya. Um, but I believe some portion of Sakya has been incorporated into Kosala. Am I correct there, Stephen?
Yeah, I think at the time of the Buddha, the Sakyan lands, the region, was sort of absorbed into Kosala, and that the Buddha and King Pasenadi were both considered, or they referred to themselves as Kosalins. And in fact, they were the same age.
Okay. So we have this king, Pasenadi. Now, you may have heard of another king at that time. That would be King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara was ruler of Magadha. And Kosala had a lot of issues with Magadha and Magadha with Kosala, meaning there was lots of warring, lots of factions, lots of um, violence in the time. And to me, when we were discussing this, I found it to be very interesting because I was thinking, we haven't changed much. It's, I know so many times people find difficulty perhaps even thinking about reading the suttas because that's thousands and thousands of years ago. But how much have we changed? And then bringing in the Game of Thrones aspect of this, Bimbisara, king of Magadha, was actually killed by his son. What was the name of his son, Stephen?
In Pali, he's called Ajata Sattu.
Okay. So what happened is he dethroned his father, the king, threw him in jail, threw away the key, and essentially let him starve to death. And seeing this new leader installed, Pasenadi, as an offering of peace, I believe he offered one of his daughters for marriage to this father killer. Am I right?
That's correct. And not only that, but one of King Pasenadi's sisters was Bimbisara's wife, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they kept it in the family then for a generation.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
Bimbisara was married to King Pasenadi's sister. And when King Pasenadi found out that King Bimbisara, had been murdered by his son, he then eventually sent one of his daughters to marry the successor, the son, Ajatasattu. And so it's a pretty complicated web of intrigue and violence, I would say.
Yeah, that's pretty complicated. Yeah, definitely.
Because they were constantly at war. And in fact, the story goes that King Pasenadi died at the gates of Magadha outside. He had tried to go talk to the then King Ajatasattu. The gates were closed. He spent the night outside and died of exposure, but was awarded a kind of royal burial by the King of Magadha, although they had been warring. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the royals of England and Germany, which were kind of one big family, even though they were fighting too. So what's old is new.
Yeah, that's for sure. So some of these places may look familiar. We have Varanasi, Bodh Gaya. Um, Nepal is where the Buddha was born. And by the way, it wasn't Nepal back then. Uh, So this is the arena in which our stories will be taking place. And I think what's most interesting is on this map, if we look at Kosala, we can see that most of, in fact, I'll flip to this chart, most of the suttas that have place names in them did in fact take place in Kosala. Stephen, how accurate is this?
It's an interesting point. This is a frequency analysis that somebody very recently named Stefan Karpik wrote. It's actually, the paper is primarily about what is Pali. What he did, this analysis of all these suttas, I think like close to 2,000 suttas that were mentioned with a place name, and he found that 75% of them took place in Kosala, and as you can see, over 1,000, almost 1,100, took place at Savatthi. And part of the reasons he's doing this is because the commentarial tradition talks about how the Pali language is a form of Magadha language. But his point, the Karpik, the author of this article, is that in fact the Buddha was a Kosalan and he spent most of his time in Kosala, not in Magadha. Magadha was where his very illustrious beginning of his career took place. But it should be said that it has been thought that a lot of suttas were not really passed down with any real location, and it's thought that perhaps the name Savatthi was just stuck on later. And that could really be skewing these statistics. And so I think it would be a mistake to take all this as sort of a historical record, as is like we're writing history here. We don't really know. It's all pretty murky, but it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of backdrop to the suttas themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. Definitely. Did you want to speak a bit about this before we move on, Stephen?
Well, this page is just it's a little technical, but I'll just read it quickly. Magadha has been described as the birthplace of Buddhism and its language, the language of the Buddha. But what this article is pushing back against, it says that the Buddha's primary connection was with Kosala, the Buddha's home, Kapilavastu, one of his favorite dwelling places, Shravasti or Savatthi, the scene of his first sermon, Sarnath, and the place of his death, Kusanagari, were all outside of Magadha. In fact, they were all, except for Kusanagari, part of the Kosalan state in the time of the Buddha. So, and also in that last paragraph, it says, in the Buddha's day, King Pasenadi of Kosala and King Ajatasattu of Magadha had each defeated the other in battle. Pasenadi finally took Ajatasattu prisoner and then made a peace sealed by giving his daughter in marriage, as we said. So, and these battles just went on. So it's kind of epic in that ancient sense. But I think what Regina and I would like to kind of point out as a primary thing to take away from all this is that the Buddha existed in this world with its violence, with its rulers, and with its kind of regular people. That the whole fabric of the Pali Canon is not so abstract and not so out of this world, that what we see when we read the Pali Suttas is that we find the Buddha in a very real place with really violent people fighting each other, deceiving each other, doing all kinds of bad things. And the Buddha himself was a close friend with King Pasenadi. And so the Buddha was friends with heads of state. He spent time talking to kings, which one might say equals he was involved with politics. He did not simply just spend time closed off in a monastery and push away worldly affairs. He was in the middle of it all.
Yes, thank you so much for that introduction, Stephen. I think with that, I think just one more point before we move on to the reading. Um, I just to reaffirm what you said, Stephen, a lot of people, a lot of Buddhists also believe that Buddhism has nothing to do with the outside world. And we see in this reading that that is not true. And we also, there's also this belief that the Buddha only spoke to monastics. And we also see in this reading that that's not true. So he had a wide ranging influence on many, many topics: marriage, fair wages to pay people. Um, and as you mentioned, Stephen, losing weight.
Dietary advice, one of
That's
my
right.
favorite suttas.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I need to spend more time on that sutta. Yep.
Yes. So I do too. So maybe then we should just get to it.
Yeah, so let's take a look. We should maybe mention that the picture that heads our set of readings is a picture of Jeta's Grove today. And Jeta's Grove, which is part of what's called Anathapindika's Park, is right next to Savatthi, which is in Kosala, which is the place where the Buddha spent a lot of time. So this is the place today, and we can imagine how it might have been. Looks pretty nice, how it might have been then.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why the Buddha had this place and the monastics had this place is because rich merchants gave it to them. So they weren't really, we can say, living in the middle of the jungle. They were living in donated land that was donated by supporters.
Great. And it does look beautiful, without a doubt. Okay. So here
So
we
maybe
are.
we should ask for our customary group of volunteer readers.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. So raising your hand if you would like to.
I'll read.
Okay, we'll start with Sue Ann, and others raise your hand. So if you could read those first two paragraphs, Sue Ann.
Okay. At Savatthi, sitting on one side, King Pasenadi of Kosala said to the Blessed One, "Here, Venerable Sir, while I was alone in seclusion, a reflection arose in my mind thus: who now treats themselves as dear, and who treats themselves as a foe? Then, Venerable Sir, it occurred to me, those who engage in misconduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as a foe, even though they may say, we regard ourselves as dear. Still, they treat themselves as a foe. For what reason? Because of their own accord, they act towards themselves in the same way that a foe might act towards a foe. Therefore, they treat themselves as a foe. But those who engage in good conduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as dear, even though they may say, we regard ourselves as a foe. Still, they treat themselves as dear."
Thank you so much, Sue Ann. Next
Mm-hmm.
up, we have Kin.
For what reason? For what reason? Because of their own, they act towards themselves in the same way that a dear person might act towards one who is dear. Therefore, they treat themselves as dear. So it is, great king. So it is, great king. Keep going.
Yes, please.
If one regards oneself as dear, one should not yoke oneself to evil, for happiness is not easily gained by one who does a wrongful deed. When one is seized by the end maker as one discards the human state, what can one call truly one's own? What does one take when one goes? What follows one along, like a shadow that never departs?
Thank you, Ken. Is there any other volunteer? Or else I will call on someone. Okay. Stephen, why don't you finish us up? Oh,
Okay.
Jane Marie. Yay, Jane Marie, thank you for volunteering. So right here, both the merits.
You're welcome. Yes. Both the merits and the evil that a mortal does right here. This is what is truly one's own. This one takes when one goes. This is what follows one along, like a shadow that never departs. Therefore, one should do what is good as a collection for the future life. Merits are the support for living beings when they arise in the other world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, as with so much of what we look at and examine here together, we can look at these teachings as helping us in the here and now, and also, if you like, in future lives. So, this is what we're talking about here when we're talking about regarding oneself as a foe. And what would it look like to regard oneself as a foe? How would you treat yourself as a foe? And I think this is very, very important because so often, without our even realizing, and I'm looking this just at the superficial level, okay, not futuralized, but I'm just looking at surface, we treat ourselves as foes. I think it may be, I'm pretty sure it's largely habitual. What does it look like to treat ourselves as a foe? Well, doing things over and over again that we know cause pain. To me, that's treating oneself as a foe. For example, okay, you guys know I'm in Houston and my friend here is very ill. And I think this is my perception, but doing things that do not gladden the mind, viewing things that make one sad. I will put this, my friend, aside. I'll put myself, if I read the New York Times, if I watch the news, it's almost like I'm treating myself as a foe because I know that the minute I do that, it's going to bring me down. And it does. It doesn't gladden the heart. And one of the things that Buddha is teaching us is how to be happy here and now and in the future. And then we look at this in regards to the Noble Eightfold Path. Well, what about right speech? When I gossip about others, am I treating myself as a friend or a foe? Will that come back at me? How will I feel when that happens? What about the body, the speech, and the mind? What is that good conduct that he's talking about? The king, I'm sorry, right here, we have this phrase, those who engage in good conduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as dear. So it may seem super fun and exciting to be like, oh my gosh, I have this juicy tidbit, and can you believe, this politician said this and this one said that. Does that accord with good conduct, body, speech, and mind, Stephen?
It wouldn't seem so. I mean, maybe one of the ways we would describe what he's saying in modern day language is self-destructive behavior. And I have to say, I think one of the things I find so interesting and so good about this sutta is that he's talking to essentially a regular person. Of course, he is talking to a king of a kingdom, but he's not talking to a highly advanced spiritual practitioner. And it's never said anywhere in the suttas that King Pasenadi had any great attainments, even though he had the Buddha himself as a teacher, which is interesting. So he was kind of, in a way, a regular person. And one of the things Regina and I talk about is navigating the suttas and finding things for ourselves to practice with. And we know that the Buddha is often said to have taught the gradual path, which means that even things like the Four Noble Truths is sort of a not the first thing. In fact, the first thing he always would teach would be dana, generosity, and sila, morality or virtue. And I think that's what we see here. He's not launching into a very abstract kind of teaching about rarefied mental states and all kinds of things that are hard to understand. He's talking about being kind to oneself, acting well. And I think when people like me look into the suttas, we tend to want to find the more sort of sexy parts where it talks about all these cool things that one can do with the mind. And we tend to sort of almost, I tend to sort of gloss over this really important facet of practice, which is treating oneself as dear. And so I think I have to kind of tap the brakes often when I read suttas and say, wait a second here. What do I really need to be focusing on today? What do I really need to be focusing right now on in my life? Is it studying the meanings of jhana? Or is it really about understanding how I should be living my daily life in a better way? So that's one of the reasons why I love this sutta so much.
Right. And so, I believe that we can say, however, that in body, speech, and mind, we do have, with the precepts that we follow and the Noble Eightfold Path, those should cover, how we treat ourselves as dear. I think
Absolutely.
yeah, right,
Absolutely.
right. So just going over a few of the things, watching out for intoxicants, right, of any kind. Heedless sexual encounters and gossip. And one of the things that I think is very, very strong for me is this good conduct of the mind. Oh my goodness. That's a tough one, because remember, I believe it's in the Dhammapada and elsewhere. All things begin there. All things spring from the mind. And I would love for you guys, and I'll do it too. Let's take some time between now and the next session and just sort of examine how many times do we treat ourselves as a foe with our mind? How
Yeah.
many, right?
And not only that, I would say, but also to notice the effects of our behavior. Because I think sometimes, what's called today doom scrolling, which is kind of getting up and looking at the news on your computer or phone, and it's pretty much horrible, and it's sort of setting the tone for your day, which is pretty unpleasant. And we sometimes maybe don't quite realize that we are setting the tone for our day. We are affecting our mind in a kind of a negative way. And is that really the best choice? Because it's so attractive, because we want to know. We feel like it's like we need to know what's happening. It's our civic duty. This is our country. But yet we have to kind of be, I think, more sensitive to ourselves, to hear ourselves in terms of how do we feel? How is this affecting us in real time? Is it making our day kind of grim? Are we feeling happy and uplifted and ready to go? And I think it's sometimes easy to sort of suppress that kind of self introspection and just kind of go about doing things that compound our feeling upset.
Right. Right. Which is why mindfulness and being aware is so important. I mean, last week, I had this thing out, which it should come with a pack of antidepressants. But, each time I picked it up and I was looking at it and I realized I'm not feeling good, and I would just put it down. And I became aware of that. I'm not feeling good in myself with this. And I was like, this is like hitting myself over the head. This isn't pleasant. So I think this would be so great if y'all can, and I'll do it too, if we can just look at some of the ways that we are a foe to ourselves, and then some of the ways we are a friend, and we can talk about it in our next meeting, because I think that would be very interesting. And then we have these beautiful stanzas. What do you make of the stanzas?
Well, it becomes a little more cosmic, of course, when it talks about, and one might say, oh, it's depressing. It's talking about the end maker. I don't want to hear about the end maker. But, it kind of helps us reprioritize a bit. What can one call truly one's own? It's a kind of cliche almost, In other words, we kind of know this, but I think the point is that it's so easy to kind of forget it, to kind of gloss over it in the mind and kind of go back to other behavioral patterns. And so I think these are wonderful stanzas to live with. What follows one along like a shadow that never departs? It's incredibly evocative and powerful question to ask oneself.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Maybe we should open it up to comments and questions about this sutta, about these verses, wondering what people took away from it.
Right. I also like the merits are the support for living beings, merit, good deeds, good thoughts. And if you have any thoughts on that, that would be great to share. Or if you have any insights on how you may treat yourself as a friend or a foe, that would be great. So anyone who has any thoughts or questions in regards to this
I
sutta?
have a thought.
Okay, Suanne.
Okay, if I may, I would just say I am right there with you, Regina, in so many ways, like getting the New York Times, listening to the news 24 hours a day, and it's depressing. But what I have found to be dear to myself is, first of all, before I turn on the news, before I go to my Facebook, before I do anything at all, I meditate and I pray. And I do that for maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And then I have to turn on the news because I do live in this country and I am a political junkie and I have to know what's going on. And yes, it still gets me upset. But I try to then do some Qigong, which calms me down. And then I go to the gym where I work out most of my anxiety and anger. And I'm not saying it doesn't start all over again many times and I have to do this constantly, but I'm just throwing it out there as a couple of ways to try to treat myself a little bit better. And when you meditate and when you pray right at the beginning of your day, it sort of sets the tone for righteous acts, both towards yourself and towards your brothers. That's what I got out of it.
Thank you so much, Suanne. Thank you for sharing. It definitely seems as though starting the day off in that way, as you and Stephen just said, is certainly preferable to any negative information coming at us right away. Would anyone else like to share about the sutta? Thank you, Suanne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, a very quiet group.
Ayavimala,
Ayavimala.
we love to hear from you.
I kept thinking when he talks about, when the king talks about, and they repeat it all through this first part. Those who engage in good conduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as dear. That sentence to me is talking about really the qualities of true happiness, how to find true happiness. And if you've gotten your mind into that, in the good conduct of your mind, you've done a lot of work getting rid of the unwholesome thoughts and allowing good thoughts and skillful thoughts to come in. So you've probably, Bhikkhu Thanissaro would say, you have to meditate to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes work to really purify your mind. And so he's describing to me, this is just my interpretation. He's really talking about these, if you're truly happy, then you're not a foe to yourself. You know, you're dear to yourself. And when we practice metta, we're always talking about, we're sending goodwill because we know that if we are happy, we're a better person. We're kinder, and we can assume that other people are the same. That if they were truly happy, they wouldn't be mean. They wouldn't be, they also would look out for other people's benefit too.
Correct. Thank
So
you.
I really like this.
Thank you so much for pointing out that sentence. And I think it's beautiful too. And I really appreciate what you said in regards to it takes work, because it really, really does. And I also agree with what you said, what Tanasaro said. It has to be done through meditation, because you see, these are the things, these are the roots that the Buddha talked about. These are the seeds that you can say from previous lives, or from early childhood, or from when we were in the womb. But so many of these are operating on the subconscious level.
Right.
Right. And so we can't eradicate them consciously. So it's wonderful to have therapy and to have friends and things of this nature. But so much of this purifying of the mind is something that must take place at a different level of consciousness. And I think that is meditation. And I have seen that for myself. And this is why I so readily agree, because yes, I have seen that, and it does work, but it's work. So great. So we have Jean, and then we have, now, am I pronouncing it An Phuong? Okay, so first Jean and then An Phuong. And you're muted, Jean. Still muted, Jean. We can't hear you. What if we go on to An Phuong? Okay.
I'm back on.
Okay.
I want to say I appreciate Aya Vimala's comment very much, but I find this so beautiful and useful, and I'm very glad for the idea to work on it during the week. I've talked a lot with friends of mine because everybody's suffering from the news right now, and and how to get back to the good things, qualities in life, and focus on them. And sometimes I bring up a little Buddhism, uh, you know, uh, but without a lot of the words, Buddhist particularly, but just some of these things, and certainly metta. But I have to be reminded over and over. And I found I was doing that practice from the session on the Monday night session that some of us are doing, and on that goes again back to the Terigata, and just trying to memorize a few lines of those poems, and almost using that as a shield to get through the day, to go back to those just 4 little lines over and over again. And because I keep forgetting them, and then I, re-memorize them and so forth. And I wanted to give a plug for the Merwin poem too, because I thought it was very beautiful the way the first whole part was about time and what time does to the way we see the world. And the second whole part was timeless. It was just this beauty that opens up the moment you let time go, and you see these things. So I appreciated that too. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, for sharing. I'm so glad that that poem resonated with you. Anfuang.
Hi everyone. I just have like a thought and a question at the same time
Great.
in regard of this being kind to ourselves.
Mhm.
I just have a tendency when I'm very hot temper. So when something unpleasant happened to me and I can't deal with it, I just avoid it and I just walk away and give myself enough time to be able to contemplate, meditate, or whatever you call it. And when I feel like I at the place when I can deal with it, I will face it. But the thing is, I just wonder if it become a habit of avoiding problem. Is that like at the moment, seeing the pandemic, it's actually give me a lot of perspective. I not purposely avoiding people, but I'm just cut off with the world. In general, I didn't talk to my friend or anyone or colleague or anything. Just stay at home, enjoy my peaceful time. And I find that's okay. I'm not socially, what can I say? I just want, my question is it a good habit to walk away from the unpleasant experience and allow your own um, your own time to develop as a person before you can just like straight out and react out of anger and all that. So that was my question.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Anfuang. I have to say that um if more people had your tendency, there would be a lot less people in prisons right now. You know, if people could walk away and just say, let me think about this. And I think it sounds to me as though you're quite aware. It's not like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I'm out of here. It sounds to me as though you're saying, I will deal with this, but later. And I think to me, that is the difference between avoiding something and saying, okay, just not now. It's too much at the moment, but I'm going to come back. As long as you do come back, to me, that seems quite skillful. And that's what a lot of people call the sacred pause, because it's that time in between thought and reaction that allows you to process what the next skillful step should be. And Stephen, do you have any thoughts about this?
Not really. I would say one thing I have found helpful, and even, of course, it's possible, at least for me, to be angry even alone in my own room uh, without any external helpers. I'm still capable of being very angry at lots of things, is to kind of, instead of, again, coming back to being aware of what's happening at the moment, start to tap into a little bit of what's happening in my mind, in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I have started to notice that when I get angry, I can notice unpleasant sensations in my physical body. And if I can note them as unpleasant, I can start to think that I don't want those feelings. And so it's not purely sort of a mental battle, but it can be almost like a physical reminder of how unpleasant those thoughts were and cause my body to feel. A little bit like, holding your hand too close to the fire. You don't really want to do that. And that remembrance, even the memory of that unpleasant burning sensation, can be a pretty good reminder to not get close again. And so for me, that kind of trying a bit to tap into the bodily sensations of anger has been pretty helpful.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that in. We are embodied beings, and I think that is so incredibly important. So thank you for that. It looks like, yes, our time is wrapping up. We have about 10 seconds for a mini metta. Let's do it, gang. Why not? So closing our eyes, we allow ourselves to feel a bit appreciative because we came today, this morning, this evening, to study Dhamma together. And doing so is a skillful act. And we know that skillful acts are ways of treating ourselves like friends. And so we wish that we will continue throughout the day or the evening to engage in skillful acts so that we may better befriend ourselves. And in befriending ourselves, we can befriend others. In being kind to ourselves, we can be kind to others. And knowing what it means to love ourselves, we can love others. And so we wish that we may be happy, we may be healthy, we may live with ease. And as we wish this for ourselves, we wish it for all living beings. May all living beings be happy, healthy, live with ease, and we most fervently wish it so. So I want to thank you all, one and all, everybody, for being here tonight and this morning, and wish you to have a beautiful day and evening, and look forward to seeing you next time here on Sutta in the City. We hope to see you soon. And take note, are you treating yourself as a friend? Are you treating yourself as a foe? And if you're comfortable, bring that to our next session because it would be great to hear your experience. All right, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Sadhu,
you.
sadhu,
See you.
sadhu.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Blessings to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Namo Buddhaya. Thank you.
Thank you.